What happens when a calm morning talk show suddenly turns into a moment no one in the studio, or watching at home, expected? The bright lights of the studio glowed softly across the iconic table of The View. Coffee mugs rested beside cue cards. The audience buzzed with anticipation, that familiar mix of excitement and curiosity that always filled the room before the cameras started rolling. Because today's guest wasn't just any celebrity. It was Hugh Jackman, the actor known for charm, grace, and that unmistakable charisma that had carried him through decades in Hollywood. From Broadway stages to blockbuster films like The Greatest Showman and Logan, was about to sit across from one of television's most outspoken hosts, Whoopi Goldberg. And what was supposed to be a friendly promotional interview was about to become something else entirely. But before we dive into the moment that stunned the studio, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for Stage View. If you love dramatic behind-the-scenes stories about celebrities, shocking interviews, and unforgettable TV moments, you're in the right place. And don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's step inside the moment. The cameras counted down. 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked on. Whoopi leaned forward slightly, that familiar grin spreading across her face as the theme music faded. And we're back on The View, and today we've got someone who needs absolutely no introduction. The audience erupted in applause as Hugh Jackman walked out from backstage, smiling broadly. He waved, shaking hands with a few fans along the front row before taking his seat at the table. Whoopi clapped along with the crowd. "Look at this," she laughed. "Every time you walk into a room, people lose their minds." Hugh chuckled, settling into his chair. "Trust me, Whoopi, that stops the second I get home and have to take out the trash." Laughter rippled through the audience. To most viewers, this looked like the usual light-hearted start to a celebrity interview. Hugh was known for his easy humor and warmth. For years, he'd built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most universally liked stars. No scandals, no feuds, no drama. But sometimes, that's exactly what makes the moment when someone finally pushes back so surprising. The conversation started the way it always did. Whoopi asked about his latest project, a new film that had been generating buzz across Hollywood. "So tell us," she said, tapping her cue card, "this new movie everyone's talking about, what pulled you into it?" Hugh leaned back slightly thoughtful. "Well, honestly, it was the story. It's about resilience, about people facing impossible choices and still finding their humanity. And when I read the script, I thought, this is the kind of story we need right now." The audience nodded, clearly engaged. Joy Behar chimed in from across the table. "And you're producing this one too, right?" "Yeah," Hugh said with a smile. "Which basically means I get to worry about twice as many things." More laughter. Everything felt comfortable. Natural. But then the tone shifted. So subtly at first that only those paying very close attention might have noticed. Whoopi tilted her head slightly, studying Hugh. "You've always been known as the nice guy in Hollywood," she said. The audience murmured approvingly. "But lately," she continued, glancing down at her notes, "you've been speaking out more. Politics, social issues, the whole thing. Some people love it. Some people say actors should just stick to acting." The room grew quieter. Hugh smiled politely. "That's not a new debate." "No," Whoopi said. "But it's one that's getting louder." She leaned forward. "So let me ask you something directly. Do you think celebrities should be influencing political conversations?" A few members of the audience shifted in their seats. It wasn't an unusual question for The View. The show thrived on debates like this. But something about the way Whoopi asked it, sharp, direct, changed the atmosphere. Hugh paused, for just a second longer than most viewers expected. Inside his mind, a quiet calculation unfolded. He'd been in interviews like this before. He knew the rhythm, the push and pull, the way a single sentence could become tomorrow's headline. But he also knew something else. Sometimes staying polite meant saying nothing at all. And today, he wasn't sure he wanted to do that. "Well," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I think everyone has a voice, celebrities included. The question isn't whether we should speak, it's whether we're thoughtful about how we do it." Whoopi nodded, but her expression didn't soften. "But you've got millions of followers," she said. "When you say something, it spreads instantly. That's influence whether you want it or not." "That's true," Hugh admitted. "So doesn't that come with responsibility?" "It absolutely does." Whoopi raised an eyebrow. "So when you make statements about issues you're passionate about, how do you make sure you're not just adding noise?" The audience leaned forward. The conversation had quietly moved from friendly chat into something closer to interrogation. He noticed it too, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in slightly, matching Whoopi's posture. I try to listen first, he said. I talk to people who know more than I do. Experts, activists, communities directly affected. Because the last thing I want is to speak over someone. Whoopi tapped her fingers lightly on the table. But isn't that still celebrities stepping into spaces where they don't belong? A murmur spread across the audience. Hugh's smile faded just a little. Why wouldn't we belong? He asked. The question hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Joy Behar glanced between them. Sunny Hostin shifted slightly in her chair. Because now something had changed. Hugh Jackman, Hollywood's famously diplomatic star, had just pushed back. Whoopi tilted her head again. Because, she said calmly, people didn't elect actors. They elected leaders. Hugh nodded slowly. That's true. Another pause. And then he said something that made several people in the audience sit up straight. But people also elected those leaders because they believed in certain values. And those values belong to all of us, not just politicians. The room went completely still. It wasn't confrontational, but it was unmistakably firm. Whoopi studied him carefully now, the hint of a smile returning. But it was the kind of smile hosts wear when they realized the conversation just got interesting. Oh, she said. So you came ready today. The audience laughed nervously. Hugh chuckled too, though his eyes held steady. I just came ready to have a conversation. Good, Whoopi replied, because now she leaned forward even closer. And the next question she asked would push this interview somewhere no one, least of all Hugh Jackman, had expected. And in the seconds that followed, the mood inside the View studio would shift from friendly debate to something that felt dangerously close to confrontation. The audience had no idea yet, but by the time the next exchange ended, this interview would be trending across the internet. And the moment Hugh Jackman finally pushed back, really pushed back, against Whoopi Goldberg, was only just beginning. The studio lights seemed just a little brighter now, reflecting off the polished table of the View as the conversation hung in the air. Moments earlier, it had been lighthearted, playful, but now something subtle had shifted. Not hostile, not explosive, yet undeniably tense. Across the table, Whoopi Goldberg leaned back slightly in her chair, studying Hugh Jackman with the careful curiosity of someone who had spent decades navigating live television debates. The audience felt it too. That quiet moment when everyone realizes the interview is no longer following the usual script. Whoopi rested her elbow on the table, fingers lightly touching her chin. You know, she said slowly, it's interesting hearing you say that. Hugh kept his expression calm. Oh, yes, Whoopi replied, because a lot of people watching might say something different. They might say celebrities live in a completely different world from everyone else. A few people in the audience murmured. Whoopi continued. They see movie stars in mansions, flying private, walking red carpets. And then those same celebrities tell regular folks how they should think about politics or social issues. She paused, letting the words settle. So when you say actors have a voice in these conversations, some people hear that and think, why should they? The room grew quiet again. Cameras slowly zoomed in. Hugh nodded thoughtfully, as if he'd heard this argument many times before. Honestly, he said. Honestly, Whoopi replied. I think that frustration is understandable. That answer surprised some people. A few heads in the audience tilted. But Hugh continued. Look, I know my life doesn't look like most people's lives. I'm incredibly fortunate. I've had opportunities many people never get. He gestured slightly around the studio. But I also don't think being an actor suddenly disconnects you from the world. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. Doesn't it? Hugh smiled faintly. I still read the news. I still talk to people outside Hollywood. I still see what's happening around me. Joy Behar leaned forward now, clearly intrigued. So you're saying celebrities should speak out more? I'm saying, he replied carefully, everyone should speak out if they believe in something. Whoopi tapped her cue card on the table. But influence matters. That's true. And when someone with your platform says something, Whoopi said, millions of people hear it. Hugh nodded again. And that's exactly why I try to be thoughtful. But Whoopi wasn't finished. She leaned forward again, her voice sharpening just slightly. Let me ask you something, Hugh. Go ahead. You've played some of the most powerful characters in film. Heroes. Leaders. People who stand up for what's right. The audience smiled knowingly. many immediately thinking of Wolverine from the X-Men films. But real life isn't a movie, Whoopi continued. And sometimes when actors talk about complex issues, they simplify things. Hugh tilted his head. How so? Well, she said, it can sound good, inspiring, but sometimes it ignores the reality people deal with every day. The words were calm, but there was an edge now. The audience shifted slightly. Sonny Hostin glanced between them, sensing the tension building. Hugh took a breath. Inside, he felt the familiar pressure of live television. Every word mattered. Every pause could become a headline. But something about the direction of the conversation made him decide not to retreat into safe, rehearsed answers. Can I ask you something, Whoopi? He said. That immediately caught attention. The audience leaned forward. Hosts almost never become the ones being questioned. Whoopi's eyes narrowed with interest. Sure, she said. Hugh rested his hands on the table. You've spent decades speaking about issues that matter to you. Social justice, equality, politics. That's true. And you've done it with passion. Whoopi nodded. So why is it different when actors do the same thing? For a moment, the studio fell completely silent. Joy Behar blinked. Sunny raised her eyebrows. Even some audience members exchanged glances. Because Hugh Jackman had just turned the conversation around. Whoopi exhaled slowly. Well, she said, I'm not saying actors can't speak. But sometimes it feels like celebrities parachute into conversations without understanding the depth of the problem. The audience murmured again. Hugh nodded slowly. That's fair criticism. Whoopi seemed slightly surprised by the calm response. But here's where I push back a little, Hugh added. He leaned forward now, mirroring Whoopi's posture from earlier. Because I don't think people should stay silent just because they're afraid someone will say they're not qualified. Whoopi watched him carefully. You don't? No. He paused. I think silence can be just as harmful as saying the wrong thing. The audience let out a quiet ripple of reaction. Whoopi tapped her fingers on the table again. So you'd rather risk being wrong? I'd rather be part of the conversation, Hugh said. The room grew tense again. Because now the discussion had clearly crossed from friendly interview into philosophical debate. And neither side seemed ready to step back. Whoopi leaned forward again. You know what some critics would say to that? What's that? They'd say celebrities speak out when it's fashionable. A few gasps came from the audience. The implication hung in the air. Hugh's smile faded. Not angry, but serious. Fashionable, he repeated quietly. Yes, Whoopi said. When it's popular. When it boosts their brand. Now the audience was completely silent. Hugh sat back in his chair. For the first time since the interview began, his expression changed. The warmth was still there. But now it was mixed with something else. Determination. Can I be honest? He said. Whoopi nodded. Always. Hugh looked out toward the audience for a moment before answering. I don't think caring about something is ever fashionable. His voice remained calm, measured. But I do think people sometimes assume the worst about motives. Whoopi tilted her head again. Meaning, Hugh said. It's easier to dismiss someone's voice than to engage with what they're actually saying. A ripple of applause broke out from part of the audience. Not loud, but noticeable. Whoopi noticed it too. She raised an eyebrow. Well now, she said. This is turning into a real conversation. The tension was undeniable now. But the studio energy had changed in another way as well. People were captivated. Because no one expected the famously diplomatic Hugh Jackman to challenge the hosts of The View this directly. Joy Behar chuckled nervously. I feel like we should grab popcorn. The audience laughed, easing the tension slightly. But Whoopi wasn't done yet. She looked directly at Hugh again. One more question, she said. All right, if you believe celebrities should use their voices, what happens when they get it wrong? The room went quiet again, because everyone knew the next answer mattered. And as Hugh Jackman opened his mouth to respond, no one in the studio realized the next few minutes would push this conversation into a moment that would explode across social media within hours. The kind of moment viewers replay again and again. The moment when a respectful debate suddenly becomes something much bigger. And Hugh Jackman was about to say something that would make the entire table stop talking. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Inside the studio of The View, no one spoke for a few seconds after Hugh Jackman finished his last sentence. Then maybe that image wasn't very honest to begin with. The audience reacted first. A few people clapped. Then more joined in. Soon the applause rolled across the studio like a wave. It wasn't thunderous, but it was strong enough that everyone at the table felt it. Across from Hugh, Whoopi Goldberg leaned back slightly in her chair, studying him again with the kind of thoughtful expression she often wore when a conversation stopped being predictable. "Well," she said slowly, "you're definitely not giving us the safe answers today." The audience laughed nervously. Hugh smiled. "I didn't realize there were safe answers." Joy Behar leaned forward immediately. "Oh, there absolutely are," she said with a grin. "Most celebrities come here and dodge every question like they're in a boxing match." More laughter rippled through the room. But Whoopi didn't laugh this time. Instead, she leaned forward again. And the room immediately sensed the shift. Because when Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward like that on live television, it usually meant the next question mattered. "You know what I'm curious about," she said. "What's that?" Hugh replied. "You talk a lot about responsibility, about using your voice carefully. That's important to me. But responsibility cuts both ways," Whoopi said. The audience grew quiet again. Hugh nodded slightly. "Explain what you mean." Whoopi tapped her cue cards on the table once, twice, then set them down. "Let's talk about influence," she said. "All right, you have millions of fans around the world. Young fans too." "That's true. And when they see you speak about serious issues," Whoopi continued, "they might assume you're an expert." Hugh stayed calm. "I try to make it clear I'm not. But do they hear that part?" Whoopi pressed. The question landed heavier than the others. The audience shifted in their seats. Because this wasn't just about whether celebrities should speak. It was about the consequences. Hugh paused before answering. "You know what I think," he said finally. "Tell me. I think people are smarter than we give them credit for." A few audience members nodded immediately. But Whoopi tilted her head. "Really?" "Yes." He leaned forward again. "I think most people understand the difference between someone sharing an opinion and someone presenting themselves as an authority." Sunny Hostin raised a finger slightly. "But sometimes those lines blur," she added. "That's true," Hugh admitted. "And when they blur," Sunny said, "misinformation spreads." Hugh nodded thoughtfully. "I agree with that." For a moment it seemed like the conversation might settle. But then Whoopi asked the question that changed everything. "So let me ask you this," she said. "Okay, if tomorrow millions of your fans took your opinion as fact, and it turned out to be wrong," she leaned closer, "would you feel responsible?" The room went completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Hugh Jackman had handled every question so far with calm confidence. But this one was different. It wasn't theoretical anymore. It was personal. The audience watched closely. Hugh folded his hands together slowly on the table. Then he answered, "Yes." The simplicity of the response surprised people. Whoopi blinked. "You would?" "Yes." Hugh nodded once. "Of course I would." The audience murmured again. "But responsibility doesn't mean silence," he continued. "Explain that." Hugh took a breath. "It means being honest about what you know and what you don't." He glanced toward the audience briefly. "And being willing to correct yourself if you're wrong." Joy Behar chuckled. "That's rare these days." A wave of laughter followed. Hugh smiled slightly. "It shouldn't be." Whoopi studied him again. "You really believe that?" "I do." She crossed her arms lightly on the table. "Because some people might say celebrities only apologize when the backlash gets loud enough." The audience reacted with a mix of laughter and oohs. Hugh didn't look offended, but his tone shifted slightly. "Sometimes that's true." Whoopi's eyebrows lifted. "But sometimes," Hugh continued, "people genuinely grow and change." Sunny nodded quietly. "That's fair." But Whoopi wasn't done. "Let me push you one step further," she said. Hugh laughed softly. "I had a feeling you might." The audience laughed too. "You've played heroes your entire career," Whoopi said. Many people in the room immediately thought of Wolverine from the X-Men series. "And heroes stand up for what they believe in," she continued. "Usually," Hugh said. "But real life is messier than movies." "That's definitely true. So how do you decide which issues are worth speaking about, and which ones you stay out of?" That question lingered longer than any before it. Because now the entire conversation had come full circle. This wasn't about whether celebrities should speak anymore. It was about why they choose to. Hugh leaned back in his chair, thinking. The studio was completely silent. Even the audience seemed to sense this answer mattered more than the others. Finally he spoke. "I ask myself one question." Whoopi leaned forward again. "And what's that?" Hugh looked directly at her. "Am I speaking to help people, or to help myself?" A soft wave of murmurs moved through the audience. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. And the answer? Hugh smiled faintly. If it's about helping myself. I stay quiet. For a moment nobody said anything. Then a loud burst of applause erupted. Not polite clapping. Real applause. Some audience members even stood. Joy Behar laughed. Well, you just won the audience. But Whoopi didn't react right away. She simply watched Hugh Jackman for a long moment. Then she leaned back slowly. You know, she said, I didn't expect this interview to go this direction. Hugh chuckled. Neither did I. The audience laughed again. But behind the humor, something else was happening. Cameras were still rolling. Clips were already being marked. Producers backstage were whispering. Because the conversation that had just unfolded was exactly the kind of moment television networks both loved and feared. Unscripted, real, and impossible to control. And while the studio audience was still applauding, no one there realized that within the next few hours, clips from this debate between Hugh Jackman and Whoopi Goldberg would explode across the internet. Commentators would argue. Fans would take sides. Headlines would appear everywhere. And the quiet pushback that began at this table was about to turn into a viral cultural moment. The applause inside the studio slowly faded, but the energy in the room didn't. Something unusual had just happened at the table of The View. What began as a routine celebrity interview had quietly transformed into a real debate, one that the audience wasn't expecting, and one that producers backstage were already realizing would echo far beyond the studio walls. Across the table, Whoopi Goldberg rested her hands together, watching Hugh Jackman with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The moment didn't feel hostile, but it was undeniably intense. The kind of television moment that felt completely unscripted. Whoopi finally broke the silence. Well, she said slowly, glancing toward the audience, I think we just had one of the most honest conversations we've had at this table in a while. The audience responded with another wave of applause. Hugh smiled modestly, raising his hands slightly as if to deflect the attention. I appreciate that. Joy Behar leaned back in her chair and laughed. You realize people at home are probably arguing about this right now. More laughter rolled through the studio. Probably, Hugh said. Sunny Hostin nodded thoughtfully. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, she added. Whoopi turned slightly toward her. Why do you say that? Because, Sunny replied, when people actually talk about these issues instead of shouting past each other, something productive can happen. Hugh nodded. That's exactly what I hope for. But Whoopi wasn't quite finished yet. She leaned forward one more time. You know what's interesting, Hugh? What's that? You didn't come here trying to start a confrontation. No, Hugh said with a chuckle. But you didn't avoid one either. The audience murmured approvingly. Hugh shrugged lightly. Good conversations sometimes get uncomfortable. Whoopi smiled. Yeah, they do. For a moment, the tension that had built throughout the discussion seemed to dissolve. The atmosphere softened. But behind the scenes, producers were already whispering to each other. Because they knew something the audience didn't yet realize. Clips from the interview were already being prepared. The conversation between Hugh Jackman and Whoopi Goldberg, the respectful pushback, the sharp questions, the surprising answers, was exactly the kind of moment that spread across the internet in minutes. And that's exactly what happened. Within an hour of the episode airing, short clips began appearing online. One moment in particular spread faster than the rest. Hugh leaning forward, calmly saying, Silence can be just as harmful as saying the wrong thing. Another clip followed right behind it. People are smarter than we give them credit for. Then the moment that truly ignited debate. If protecting an image means staying silent, maybe that image wasn't very honest to begin with. Across social media platforms, reactions exploded. Fans of Hugh Jackman praised his calm, but firm pushback. One viral post read, Never thought I'd see Hugh Jackman debate Whoopi Goldberg on live TV like that. Respect. Another said, He stayed respectful the whole time but didn't back down. That's rare. But not everyone agreed. Some viewers defended Whoopi Goldberg, saying her questions were necessary. Whoopi asked exactly what many people are thinking, one commenter wrote. Celebrities do have huge influence. It's fair to challenge that. Another post read, This is why The View works. Different perspectives, real conversation. Within hours, news outlets began running headlines. Unexpected debate between Hugh Jackman and Whoopi Goldberg goes viral. Did Hugh Jackman just challenge Whoopi Goldberg on live TV? Fans react to intense conversation on The View. Back inside the studio, though, none of that chaos was visible. The hosts were wrapping up the segment. Whoopi turned toward Hugh again. You know, she said, I appreciate guests who are willing to actually talk. Hugh smiled. Well, that's why people watch shows like this, right? Joy Behar laughed. Sometimes they watch hoping for a fight. The audience burst into laughter. Well, Whoopi said, glancing at Hugh, we didn't get a fight. No, he replied. But maybe we got something better. The audience clapped again. Whoopi nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe we did. A producer's voice echoed faintly from off-camera. 30 seconds. The hosts straightened their notes. The show was about to move on. But everyone at the table seemed to know this conversation wouldn't end when the cameras stopped. Whoopi turned to the audience one last time. And we'll be right back. The red light on the camera clicked off. For a brief moment, the studio relaxed. Audience members began whispering excitedly to each other. Some were already pulling out their phones. Hugh stood up from his chair and shook hands with the hosts. Whoopi smiled at him. That was a good conversation. Hugh nodded. It was. And just like that, the moment ended inside the studio. But outside, it was only beginning. Because by the end of the day, millions of people had already watched the clips. Comment sections were overflowing with debates. Was Hugh Jackman right? Was Whoopi Goldberg asking the tough questions that needed to be asked? People argued, shared the clips, replayed the key moments again and again. And that's the strange thing about live television. Sometimes the most memorable moments aren't the ones producers plan. They're the ones where two people simply refuse to give rehearsed answers and instead choose to have a real conversation. And now we want to hear from you. What did you think about this unexpected exchange between Hugh Jackman and Whoopi Goldberg? Do you think celebrities should speak out on social issues? Or should they stay out of the debate? Drop your opinion in the comments below. We read them all. And if you enjoy dramatic behind-the-scenes stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Stage View. Because the next shocking celebrity moment might be even bigger than this one.